Hi, Team Six. Good work, and I love the fact that you're taking the educational component so seriously because it's dear to my heart. You should know I appreciate all your recommendations and the thought you put into it and the research. I think in at heart, your proposal represents a considerable extension of some things we're already doing in a smaller way. But I like the encouragement that your proposal makes. So, for example, the idea of getting the administrators together in a room and sort of solidifying the contact that we already have with the school districts and the schools themselves, that's terrific because that will raise it to another level and give it a certain underlining, a certain importance that would be very useful. I think the idea of exposing all students in the system eventually to opera is terrific. We try to do that. Of course, we're limited in terms of what we can do in the theater right now with our single dress rehearsal. But for many years, I've wanted to have at least two, so that would double the direct outreach in terms of in-performance experience of the students. And of course, we have the school tour program, which I mentioned before, and in that we've done reduced or versions for younger singers. We're talking emerging artists, post school kind of thing, and that is post BA, BMUS, who go into the schools on tour and present reduced versions of standard repertoire or new works. And this often leads to some curriculum connection. So, for example, this coming year, we're going to be presenting a smaller version of the opera we commissioned a few years back called Mary's Wedding. It's a story based in World War I. It's Canadian. All the characters in it are Canadian. One of them is an historical person. And so we're going to take a smaller version of that through the schools, and that will give rise to a lot of discussion around the history of World War I and its build up, its effects, the Canadian participation in it, what that meant for us as a nation. All of those things are implicit in this work. So, and schools have glommed onto that as a real opportunity to up the ante in terms of awareness of a difficult period. So, you make very, very good points, and your point about any individual opera reaching into a whole variety of disciplines, language, literature, history, art, and then all the practicalities of its construction. The history of costuming is another aspect that often gets overlooked, but it's a fascinating and detailed discipline itself. We also have a little bit of experience with that. So I talked a little bit about earlier in the introduction about Benjamin Britten Festival that we did last February, and we involved two schools, Victoria High School. They took on the design. They made, in their art class, there was a competition for the design of the set, and they helped in its construction. So there was that was part of the art class curriculum at Big High. And then at Glenlyon Norfolk, the art instructors got very excited about the potential for the students to design and create the masks and at least the headdresses for all of the creatures that go into the ark in the story of Noah's Ark. So that too became a staple of the curriculum in that year, this past fall, particularly for Glenlyon Norfolk. So I think you're absolutely on the money with this, and I think it is something we can pursue with vigor. And I thank you very much for the push in that direction.
Hello, Team 6. So you just heard from Timothy Vernon that he's very, very receptive to your recommendation. Great work. And as you could see, I shared with him both your final recommendation and your runner-up, or the one that you merged in there. So clearly you did an excellent job of deeply understanding the needs of the client and, in assessing the situation. So great work on that. Another thing I really appreciated in your presentation was how you converged early on. So right away, when you were in the clarification stage, you identified the fact that opera is not a mainstream art as the core issue to address. You then concluded that the thing to do would be to get opera into the schools and expose children to it. So your problem statement and your BHAG were very focused and very precise. So what I'd be curious about in your paper is the literature would suggest that this is a good thing to do, that the more precise you are at that point, the more creative you can be. And I'd be curious about your impression. Is that in fact what took place? You also should be commended for the rigor of your process. And I think that was largely due to Viva's process coordination, but I could be wrong. Viva, if I'm giving you undue credit, please let me know. I don't think I am, though. And so you had a very thorough and rigorous process. And again, I'd be curious to hear about that in your paper. Was that something that freed you up to be creative? Or on the other hand, did that in some way constrain you? One thing I found really interesting about Timothy Vernon's response was he seemed to fully grasp that you were building on what they were already doing in terms of getting opera into the schools, but he seemed a bit fuzzy on the how. Now, it's possible that, you were the last one, that it was just not close enough reading of what you were suggesting, but it's possible as well that it was just the communication from your end wasn't clear. What I get in terms of what you're proposing that is different is that you're proposing that instead of just bringing opera into the schools, that you actually systemically put it into the curriculum. That's would be A, and that B, that you execute this by getting university students in there as facilitators. So hopefully I'm right in that. Now, I just want to comment though on the fact that Vernon that Vernon seemed to see you as really building on what they were already doing and didn't really comment on the specificity of what you were suggesting, that or didn't comment on it extensively. The one thing I do want to question this team on. This team seemed highly convergent. And I really want to stress that that is not a criticism. The teams that are highly divergent, I'm asking them to reflect on that. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on your highly convergent nature. And I commented to you about this early on when you so quickly converged on your BHAG and your problem statement. I do always ask people to do that, but you actually, I think, are the first team that has ever listened to me on that. So it was a wonderful surprise. But I noticed four things that I just want to point out in terms of convergent tendencies. One is that your comment in the discussion forum that you did not find forced connection that useful. So, and Harry, you had some follow up thoughts on that. It might just be that it wasn't useful in this situation, but it might also be that this team is more comfortable not taking those leaps. If you look at the strength of your recommendation, it's that it builds on what's already positive. If you look at that from another direction, you could ask the question, well, is it not going far enough from what's already there? So number two thing I noticed was that you converge quickly. We talked about that. Number three, I noticed these numeric scores that you gave to in order, there wasn't any sort of, you did do a gut check, which I thought that was great, but you relied very heavily on left brain analysis to converge. Now, again, I think that's rigorous, and I think that might be a fantastic way to go. So it's not a critique, it's just noticing where you were convergent when other teams perhaps weren't. But fourth, and this I found the most interesting of all, I had asked that you put novelty in as a criterion in your decision matrix. Now, the reason I asked that was I realize that novelty for its own sake is not desirable and should not be a criterion. However, given that creativity is defined as that which is novel and useful, I was putting out the stretch challenge for this class of trying to meet those criteria for this project. So trying to meet the criteria of could you find something that is both practical and also novel? So you didn't put it in there. And so I'm not saying any of this is a critique, but I am making the observation that this team seemed to stick closer to convergence than others. And what are your thoughts on that? I would also ask the related question about whether you kept your process experiment around using visuals to communicate ideas. And I ask that only because in some teams that set that experiment, I really saw a lot of visuals on their Linoip board. And I'm wondering if I didn't see as many visuals on yours, and I'm wondering if you kept it. I know you were working in many different places. I'd also like to comment on your criteria. Now, what's really interesting about these criteria is that I think you have one, two, three, four, five, six criteria, or is it six? And of them, if you look at them, five look at potential benefits and one looks at feasibility. So, what do I mean by this? Let me just flip to it on my big notes. What I mean by this is that succession planning is a potential benefit of the recommendation, expanding demographic, impact on promoting high arts, protects integrity of opera, program expansion. So all of those look at expected benefits. Then you have one, resources available to facilitate solution, which looks at sort of the short term, can we do it? Do we have the capital or the resources to do it? So what that means is that feasibility actually isn't ranking that high. You're not looking at you're not looking at, for example, long-term sustainability, or you're not looking at um, fit with your startup capital versus fit with mission. I'm not saying that you should. I'm just making the observation, and I want to talk about the implications of that on your recommendation. Your idea around putting um, getting university students to help enforce curriculum, I think it's a brilliant idea. I think that would be great, and I think that's absolutely how you could meet your ambitious BHAG. That said, I think you underestimate the logistical requirement. I don't think, first of all, politically getting the curriculum in schools would be an easy task, number one. Number two, running a program with university students, coming up with the curriculum, even if it wasn't university students running it, would be difficult. Then deploying these university students. I think on multiple levels, this would be very, very complex. And Royal Roads, by the way, does do this with science, right? Where our science students go into the schools, and it's a wonderful program, very successful. That says it has its complexities. So I noticed that you rank it 4.25, which I assume resources available, which I assume because it's the higher score is better, that you're seeing it as less resource intensive than the other solutions. And I would question that, because in terms of, it's because if you're taking resource in its broad sense of what would be required to deploy this, I think it would be actually more complex to deploy than, for example, inviting all school district related decision makers to a special performance and consult with them. So that said, that doesn't mean don't go for it. It means go for it with a more thorough consideration of what's involved if you choose to. And I think the decision between those two, when you said the team struggled between those two alternatives, I think what you're struggling with in a way is, do you take on a big complex project like influencing the school curriculum that will get you to your BHAG, can get you to your BHAG? Or on the other hand, are you going for something like having an event with all the superintendents, which will not directly get you to your BHAG, but will be one step to relationship building that may ultimately lead you there? So in a way, the two different deal with a different BHAG. The BHAG for getting the superintendents in the room is more around just the ultimate goal would be around relationship building. So if you had relationships, or if you had buy-in, whatever that looked like, from 80% of superintendents, that would be success for that BHAG, right? So it's a smaller scale one. So I think you need to tease out what criteria you're using and weigh those solutions based on that. In all, you truly did a great job, team. Superb work. far exceeding what I expected going into this. So thank you for that. And please take all the feedback in this presentation as food for thought as you head in to your final paper, or not your week 5 paper, which I very much look forward to reading. Thank you.